Okay, we're going to call to order the Governor's UAV Council, UAS Council. We're here on August 26, 2020. This meeting is being recorded for everyone's information. This is a public meeting, the meeting of the council. First, we'll do roll call, and I will pull this up to track as we go along here. Just for the attendees' information, the governor's office did find this past week that they had missed assign a member to the council. That part of the audit recommendations was to include a member of DOA's SITSD. So they reached out to SITSD to ask them if they had someone that wanted to participate. That person will be a gentleman by the name of Joe Froelich. He's part of their security team. So he'll be joining us going forward, but he did notify me that he was unable to attend today's meeting on the short notice. So you'll see that name showing up here from this point forward, and that's who that is.
So who is he with?
He's with SITSD, the State IT Bureau, with DOA, and he's part of their security team. So he'll probably weigh in on when it comes to the discussion on data security and where it's stored, such as that. Okay, Butch Hughesby. Don't see him. Dan Olson. Already notified he will not be present. JD.
I'm here, thanks.
Dustin Temple. Gordy Kahn.
Here.
Thanks, Gordy. James Strait.
Here.
Jason Smith. Jen Fowler. Previously excused. Mike Bosman.
Yes, here.
Paul Szpaniak. Steve White.
Here and present.
Sorry,
Wes,
Paul's here. Correct.
Oh, Paul.
Yep,
Okay,
sorry.
Wes, sir.
I'm here.
And Joe Froelich. Not here. Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. So we'll jump into the discussion here. We're going to start with the procurement process, just a little update. The governor's office is, if you recall from the original executive order, and I can bring that up here real quick. I have that pulled up just momentarily. The executive order released in April gave some due dates for the council, which were missed based on the late convening of the council. So they're looking for some recommendations on some new dates. So we'll be working on some of that. These dates originally were kind of guesstimates on what might be achievable for the council. And at the time frame, they were, I thought, pretty aggressive. Now we're even more aggressive. But they appreciated the fact that we're trying to meet every week to keep moving forward on these things. They were impressed by the fact that we're trying to fast track some of these things to get caught up. So, I'm hopeful that in the next few weeks, we will be able to put together a draft of recommendations for the statewide procurement process for UAS. And the two areas we'll have to still develop is required and recommended areas of evaluation. I think our cost benefit analysis simple sheet is probably a good place to start. And then reporting disclosure requirements of an agency. So I want to talk about a couple topics on that here briefly. Gordy, I don't know if you had any, oh wait a minute, Gordy wasn't here today. He is here today. If you had any information updating anything on the procurement side or the PIM members working with you.
Yeah, I could show you a table I started to put together. I want to see if this is what you guys felt would be helpful. It's under the procurement channel files, UAS hardware, software services, procurement matrix. I'll try and share it here. Once again, I get too much crap open. That's the wrong one. You guys don't need to see my budget. Now, are you guys seeing a Word document or Excel? I can't tell.
I think it's Word.
Word.
Okay. my whole, everything went crazy on me. Okay, so if you're seeing what I hope you're seeing, it's a table. And across the top, I put our different levels or items being purchased. So low cost hardware, high cost hardware, software, and UAS services. And then on the left column, it's the different steps that are required or optional, or just, that's what I guess we got to decide. But so every step will have an internal budget and approval process. We'll recommend the cost benefit analysis as the cost and risk go up. Same with risk analysis. And then I think we haven't really, I don't know, we've talked about data storage plan. I think each of the options need to take that into consideration, whatever we provide as guidance out of this council or however that comes to be. And then I have not got with the ITSD guys, but now that Joe Froelich is on the council, I'll try and get with him to talk about ITPR. But generally, I just said ITPR is just required for software. And then I haven't got I thought with the procurement method that would link up to the state or county procurement, your limited solicitation, RFP, those things I haven't got completed yet. But I just wondering if this the type of guidance you guys think would be the way we want to go.
Yeah, I've got a question if I could, Gordy. Just to understand your table, that when you say like simple cost benefit analysis optional, that would be at the call of the department head, maybe that they want to see something more.
Yeah, and it goes to that, and I put in there, I think, and I just saw that thing Craig had up. I think we were talking under 1,000, and maybe we don't have to do anything. So I put 1,025.
Okay.
But yeah, it would be an internal, I think, decision, depending on your, if you're state, local, and your own organization, I think.
So with the simple cost benefit analysis, like where you say recommended, would it be you'd use the same procedure, you develop a framework for that cost benefit analysis, so it'd be used for all of those others, kind of the same thing, just fill in the numbers or something?
That's what I'm thinking we could provide. We have that simple template that's out there, and then we had some more complex, so we could say, look, for these, if just use that simple one. And then if you're doing a multi-year project or something, you might look at MDT sample, or so we could provide maybe 2 or 3 templates depending on their needs.
Okay, and then and on risk analysis and planning, is I personally, well, if the risk analysis is, I don't know what the risk is it a risk of not being smart with spending the money, or is it a risk of the equipment being somewhat dangerous? Because I mean, you could have a $3,000 piece of hardware that probably would warrant risk analysis. So I almost think that with risk analysis, you might want recommended across the board. I don't know. I mean, I'm just speaking for myself.
Sure. I think it's never a bad idea to look at what could go wrong and how we're going to mitigate the
Yeah.
risk. So definitely we could put recommended on it. I mean,
Well, that's just me. So, I mean, everybody else can weigh in on it. When I see the word risk, I look at it in the risk of something going haywire, and I have to call the insurance agent.
I think the risk analysis is scalable to the nature of it, and that would be a decision the person purchasing it would make of what level. But I have a comment, and Gordy sent this to the little subcommittee, and I said, looks good. And now I'm sitting here thinking about it, and I'm rethinking that, Gordy, so forgive me.
Oh, worries.
But I read the audit, and all the audit recommendation says, and I don't need to read it to everyone, it just says that agencies should conduct or will conduct a risk or a cost benefit analysis before they buy a UAV. It doesn't say what level of detail, and I guess all I'm recommending here is we don't overthink this and make it so dang complicated that people get confused. I think it's good to have this matrix so about a data storage plan, about an ITPR, about a budget process. But frankly, I think you can add another row and have simple, right below simple cost benefit analysis, have detailed cost benefit analysis, and have it the simple one required for the low risk one and the more complex one required for the high cost one, and then whatever we would choose for procurement and UAS services. And then we've laid out that which one is required, but one is required for all of them, because that's what the audit says, is you will do it.
Mhm. Yeah, that's
So I
good.
don't want to leave that as optional. It's my observation.
Yeah,
I had a quick comment, if I could, just really fast here. I mean, forgive me, I've had to miss a couple of meetings because of conflicts with scheduling. But this just really seems like this is more geared towards, and forgive me if I'm wrong here, seems like it's more geared towards purchases that are in-state and purchases through agencies within the state of Montana. That's what it looks like it's geared towards to me. My concern is that most of the people that we deal with are cinematographers. We deal with the with companies and small production companies, on a more of a commercial scale. And one of the things that I notice here is the data storage plan guidance provided by UAS Council. All of that footage that those people shoot, we are not responsible for that footage when those people shoot it. They actually give it to us as a courtesy that we can use to promote the state through tourism and marketing. But when you say data storage plan, I don't see how we could ever actually implement that with Warner Brothers. I mean, so I guess this is this more geared towards state agencies and people that are directly within the state of Montana, because all of our drone usage clientele is corporate. So
Well, if you go, this is Mike again, I'll keep harping on it, but you go back to the audit and it specifically says require cost benefit, and it's for the response is for executive agencies. So the governor's office's response doesn't say anything for anyone outside of an executive agency to perform that. So I think the audit's
okay,
clear.
that answers my question. So yep.
JD, to chime in on the data side, I think what the recommendation we might want to make is just that the data acquired from these operations needs to be handled in accordance with state, data requirements. You do an assessment if it's a high risk or sensitive information, PII, that you handle it accordingly. If it's, in this case, your cinematography data, that you're just handling it in accordance with any state laws required to be handled for that information.
Yeah, we typically don't green light anything if it's going to be sensitive at all. We pretty much we kind of discourage that kind of behavior altogether. So because almost everything that comes to our office is ultimately public facing in one way or another. So if it were to be anything sensitive, we would probably try to kibosh that relatively quick.
Right. And but if someone has rights to the cinematography data, you may have restrictions on what you can share or something, right? So you just have that documented or something, whatever your process is.
And that would be held in confidential files and stuff. We do have plenty of stuff like that, but ultimately, if they receive any kind of funding or assistance from us, any information that they send to us in their deliverable product has to be accessible by the public. In other words, pretty much Montana, the state can use it for marketing. It can be used by tourism. And then that is a matter of public record because taxpayer dollars were used to provide assistance to, if they receive funding of any kind, so yeah,
Sure.
yeah, but I get your point. I digress.
Would we
Yeah, no.
want to address sharing of data to make sure it's available to others if needed, or?
And I think, we may end up doing that a little bit as we get deeper into the data side of it, because the data itself is kind of a step beyond the procurement piece, unless you just procure data. We can give a recommendation there. Right now, I'm thinking you got to follow state guidelines for handling the data. if Department of Justice, well, let's just say, so one of the things that came to my mind is if someone's doing an aerial flight and getting imagery data, and in that imagery data is something that might be considered critical infrastructure to the state of Montana. For example, DNRC has a hydropower facility. We may want to handle that piece of the imagery different than general timber and landscape data for sensitivity stakes or for data security pieces. And so we handle that accordingly to the policy of data risk and security on those things that the state ideally has established elsewhere. And if not, an agency may need to establish that information, or we have to give a recommendation to it, perhaps, that the state develop those things. But as a council itself, we may not necessarily need to do that. It may be a recommendation that DOA provide better guidance on it, but they have some already for data classification and such. So I think we could probably reference their data classification categories for sensitivity of whether or not it's released for public consumption.
Craig, JD raises, I think, opens up a great conversation on this, because maybe the one thing that this document needs is a definition of what data is, because cinematography in its broadest sense is just that. It's capturing images that are, some of it you just see driving down the highway, and it's promotion of the state. But we're not supposed to be flying over critical infrastructure that's been roped off by the FAA. But if those images are captured, then maybe that falls into the definition of the data. These things are considered data. These things are not considered data. And maybe that could be something that's in the document so that everybody's on the same page as far as what is the data that we're going to be protecting. Because when you mentioned data, I was just assuming it was waypoints on a map from the engineers at DEQ. I really hadn't thought that of data being just general imagery. And so I don't know.
Yeah, another thing I wanted to point out real quick, just chiming in on that, is that anybody who is on our list that's listed in a professional sense as a drone pilot, we have different categories. We have a category for people that have their FAA Part 107, and those are more like professional drone operators. And those folks, we kind of vet those people pretty strictly, like to make sure that they really do know what they're doing. And if they have their Part 107, typically they do. But the people that we're a little bit leery about are the people that don't necessarily have a Part 107, who claim they are this drone pilot. The Part 107 people, they're trained to know where the restrictions are, what the FAA ceiling heights are, things like that, and ethical practices when they're piloting their craft. So those folks, I think by and large, they do really strictly try to play by the rules, because they don't want that license yanked, and those people, we have a bunch of them that are really, really good and really, really strictly follow the rules. It's the few that we have that are just sort of novices that we watch with a little bit, more about.
JD, not to cut you off there, but
I'm done.
well, I'm just wondering in what, I mean, we don't need to get too in depth on it, but there really shouldn't be a situation where the state contracts anyone that doesn't have a 107.
Yeah.
We don't. I'm talking about if we as the state, we don't contract anyone
Right.
at all. I'm talking about production companies. So, you might get a low budget film that will come in, and they might try to hire someone that is a freelancer who is super cheap, who doesn't have an FAA Part 107, and we try to discourage that.
Yeah.
It is definitely not us contracting anyone. We're just sort of an ethical watchdog, and we try to make sure that they hire people that are professional and licensed. And so, but there are people that do try to sneak in, under the cracks. I was just saying that most of the people with the 107, they've been trained to know what the restrictions are and where they can and cannot fly.
Sure.
Yeah, and generally, those things are often addressed in state contracts based on requirements of them. The vendor and any subcontractors must, in this case, meet FAA regulations for flying to collect imagery, and or there's often a requirement that they give proof of liability insurance of several $1,000,000 for doing these operations, so that they are the ones liable if they drop a drone out of the sky, not the state who contracted with them. And so hopefully those are being addressed in that way too.
And I put our federal contract up, a couple weeks ago, and it does have some language in there about, it doesn't really go specific real deep into data, but one of the things it does mention is, media and press releases. And, I feel that kind of covers it a little vaguely, but basically it says before the vendor, if you're using a vendor, can release anything regarding those operations, that they would need to be reviewed by a designated agency. So maybe some sort of statement like that, where the vendor is required to protect that information without a request being submitted for them to release anything.
Yeah, and I would expect that should be included in the contracts that we have with those vendors. That's where it would be binding upon them, I would think. So, but it's a good point, and I like it. Going back to the other things on simple cost benefit analysis and such, thinking about this some, and Gordy, the template you got here is pretty decent. I think, and based on the wording in the executive order and such and the requirements, that the simple cost benefit analysis for 1,000 over is probably going to be required. But I think what we may want to do is in our language is state that it's required that an agency conduct it. But as far as the reporting of it and how detailed they go, probably could and maybe should be left to the agency's internal procurement processes and reported to their CFO, such that they understand that if requested, they need to procure or provide those cost benefit analysis for their operations. The thought here is that it must be done, but someone at some point may require or request a compilation of those for a particular agency, and they should have those documents in order. And probably, in my mind, the CFO's office is the one that should be coordinating and managing that, because they're the one ultimately that is approving the use of the agency's dedicated budget for that particular purchase. And so they'd be the one to want to defend the cost benefit analysis in that particular case. Any thoughts on that there?
So Cray, what we're saying is we're providing an outline of best practices that the folks should follow. And it's up to them to go through these steps, determine the best, how to follow them. And it's their responsibility to have all that on file. And I guess there's really not a governance arm here.
I'm kind of thinking that would make the most sense given the current structure of state government and the authorization and budgeting requirements already in place. Any other thoughts on that particular idea for the reporting piece and the requirement piece? And on that note, we can provide that simple cost benefit analysis template as a sample or example, but maybe what we want to do is just, put in our document that the agencies shall conduct a cost benefit analysis for any procurement over $1,000, and such analysis should include or must include these particular considerations, and we list out the things that are like provided in the simple cost benefit analysis. But it's optional for an agency that, for the higher cost procurements, that they may want to go deeper into some of these other areas as provided in that other template. But maybe we don't want to get into specifying exactly which ones have to be done at which cost. But it'd be the determination of their fiscal office of what is required internally to do that. But at a minimum, they should have these certain items covered. And we probably don't even need to mandate they use our form, as long as they have this information collected and documented that they would be good if they had a different process internally that they already use.
You know, it might be worthwhile too on the cost benefit analysis, and maybe this was said and I missed it, but something that really works out well is almost, I see a lot of times, like maybe just an example of how it was done on a particular purchase or something. Doesn't really say you have to do it this way, but it just gives the people that have to do it an idea of the components of doing it and ultimately what the goalpost looks like.
Yeah. Yeah, that allows the flexibility, but still meeting the objectives that need to be met. And then they can determine the level of effort or requirements internally that need to be done.
And that also maybe gives some guidance to the people that have to make the decisions that you know, that this was the example presented and this is how they did it, and looks like it probably does a good job of it, and so they don't have to try to figure it out.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, because depending on an agency's budget, $26,000, they may want a pretty comprehensive cost benefit analysis, but another agency may be like, not worth the time. This is a small piece to our operation. We've already justified these. A simple will do. I'm kind of and back to, I think, the question someone had asked. I'm inclined not to necessarily include the words risk at the top of that, just because risk is so subjective as whether it's low or high.
Right.
And I'm not seeing that in the executive order. It's the cost benefit analysis. Now, risk is a piece of that we would recommend people analyze and consider. But otherwise, then you got a matrix of, well, what about low risk, high cost, or low cost, high risk? I mean, there theoretically would be those categories too, unless risk is only if we're only actually measuring the procurement cost as being how much is lost if this goes poorly. But the liability risk is what's on my mind, which could be very high, even though it's a very inexpensive drone, and maybe even inversely so. If you buy something too cheap, your risk may be going higher than if you buy something a little more expensive.
Mm-hmm.
So since procurement rules for the state, Mike, you're familiar with these if I'm off here, or Gordy or someone, I think it's mostly based on cost, not risk, based on the guidelines, right? In the breakdown.
Yeah, procurement, my internal controls would require some risk analysis based on what we're doing.
Yeah, I think a risk analysis is a good recommendation. I'm just not sure we want to categorize it per se in that.
So just go straight on cost is what you're recommending. To follow, you want to follow more just the procurement. Okay.
Well, I think for the guideline there, we follow the procurement breakdown, and maybe in our simple cost benefit analysis, that one of the categories we ask them to analyze is risk and benefits, right? Obviously, I mean, that's already built into the template. So they are analyzing that, but risk is a tough one to, I mean, dollar numbers is pretty well defined. You know where you're at with a dollar number. With risk, that's very subjective, depending on what perspective you're coming from. So that could get us into a lot of gray area that takes a lot of work to define out. And maybe we leave that at the agency to determine what their risk is. DOJ, again, flying over people may find a higher risk for a particular operation than DNRC, who's flying over grassland.
I guess for now, provide any more input, and then, like I say, I'll try and connect with Joe Froelich, which from ITSD, and he's the security guy over there, I think, still. So he'll have some input on the data, I'm sure. And then I'll have
Yeah,
to,
hopefully he can help point us to their data policy. I know they've got one. And that would probably be what we want to reference is the state data classification policy, and not try to reinvent that as well. I get a little lost in trying to keep track of their policies. They have so many. I think they're getting a new tool to help organize that, which may be helpful. I think we were going to discuss a little bit with the state procurement office. Did that happen, or were we going to do that? We talked a bit about that last meeting. Or do we just want them to review this when we're done to make sure it meets all their boxes?
I could probably reach out if you want me to and have them review where we're at and just get some input going along the way.
At some point here, it probably would be good just to make sure that we're good on the path we're going down. And I was thinking, and I can even try to start drafting this up to do the kind of the preview document that'll encapsulate this of identifying the breakdown of what we had discussed of the airframe and power plant versus the information that hangs off of it, and then the data piece of it. And I think we want to keep pretty general on the definitions. You know, Steve, with you know, as I started thinking about what could be gathered from this, and Mike's comment last week, you know, it could be infrared data. It could, you know, in Jen's case, it could be atmospheric sensor data. It could be imagery. It could be video. It could be LiDAR. It could be, you know, so, you know, maybe it's just anything collected by a UAS system in the operations of its mission is likely data that would need to be considered how to be handled.
Well, then maybe just have a list of, you know, what kind of data are you collecting, and then have an analysis of that by, you know, IT or whoever is going to analyze the application for the acquisition or whatever, that this is what you're going to do with it. And then that would all start a discussion on their end. But at some point, somebody has to say, no, you know, we're going to have some protection over this stuff. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I think, and we'll find out from Joe when we chat with him, but I believe they defer the responsibility of identifying what category that data falls into to the agency that's collecting it.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And then that agency has to categorize it and determine what the appropriate handling process is for that information based on the type of data that it is.
Okay.
So I'm going to put as a goal for us that we try to have a draft put together of what that recommendation would look like within the next, say, 2 weeks. That we can try to do something and figure out if we have a draft that can be released. What I'm trying to get from Guylaine in the governor's office is who needs to review that. If the council puts together a draft, because they had dates in the executive order for the draft release and then a final release. I'm trying to find out who needs to review this. Does it have to be publicly available for a comment period to the public? Does it have to be, is it an internal process, and get that? So I'll gather that information from her to know. And so if we could have something that we think is a draft in the next few weeks, put together something, get it reviewed by the council, tweak it to what we think is a good starting point, then we can go through that process and hopefully finalize that and maybe have the procurement piece knocked out here sometime this fall. Any other thoughts or comments on the procurement discussion piece? Mike, did you have anything else based on what you've been seeing?
No, I'm still hung up on what we're trying to accomplish beyond what the audit says we should be doing. And I trust your guidance that we're going down this path, but when I read the audit, I feel like we're way beyond what they're asking. But otherwise I'm fine with where we're headed.
I'm sensitive to that too, Mike, and that's where, and I really appreciate you bringing that in, because that's kind of where I'm trying to back this up a bit of saying, okay, you know, here's what what the executive order is saying we should do. They're asking what should be the mandatory cost benefit analysis for anything over $1,000. And so we give a recommendation on what that should look like for an agency, but not get too far into the weeds of here's the form you have to use and here's how the process has to go and all that stuff, so that we can meet those base level requirements without going way beyond.
Okay,
And
that makes sense.
if we are going beyond it in a particular area as we draft this out, I appreciate you highlighting that and saying, hey, I think we're going too far. We should just allow the agencies to have the flexibility on how to meet it. We just kind of put out the requirement that they have to meet this at least to this minimum level, and just leave it at that or something along those lines to give them the framework of what that looks like, so they know what the picture of success is.
Okay. That makes sense. And I'm maybe leaning into the audit too much and not the executive order enough. So I'll go back and reread the executive order too, but that sounds good, Craig. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll take a look at the audit again as well. I haven't looked at that in a while. Make sure it all lines up. Any other comments on that plan for the procurement piece? Okay, and so let me just grab my other document here. So I guess I will, at this point, I'm just going to open it up. Has there been any further discussion or work done on any of the other topics that we're looking at for the MUAS plan, centralized oversight or citizen interaction? I know in my piece there has not been.
No, we haven't met on that, and I guess when Jen gets back, we can start digging back into it.
One question I did have, I know I missed last week's meeting, so sorry about that. The week prior, somebody had suggested there might be an MDT contact worth tying into our committee. Is that still?
Yeah, that was a good topic last week, but Craig's got it.
Okay.
Yeah. So that did happen last week, and I do have a recording of that if you want, Wes, that you can listen to the conversation if that would be helpful on that.
Sure. Yeah, that would help.
So I'll
Wes,
get
go ahead. And if you're looking for a contact that's a regular attendee to your subcommittee meetings, it probably isn't our chief engineer, because you might not get him for that much time, but understanding what you really need would help me get the right person, whether it's an aeronautics person or someone who works in engineering that's currently managing our rudimentary drone program. That would help.
I think it's probably my 2 bits is that it'd be somebody that would be in the aeronautics arena, because the discussion we had was, the centralization of it, and we're still, we're all still hammering out on that, scratching our head. But I think it's probably more in the somebody that understands the UAS, UAV world, and
Okay.
and the aircraft world, basically.
Okay.
I don't know, Wes.
Well, I'll visit with. Go ahead.
Oh, you go ahead, Mike. Sorry.
Oh, I was going to say I'll visit with Dwayne Cayley, because I knowing what was just brought up, it's probably somebody that's working actively on our drone program, which is somebody who works for Dwayne, not aeronautics. But that helps me, so I can visit with him and get somebody in touch with you, Wes.
Yeah, I think that would be good, just to get some. Yeah, they don't need to be in there every week in the committee meeting, but it would be good to at least have somebody we could tap into when questions arise.
Yep.
Sounds good.
Okay, so it sounds like we're gonna have more meetings on that in a subgroup to try to work on those things. Anything else people want to comment on that or anything else here? That's about all that I think we have prepared to discuss today, unless someone has a topic they want to dive into a little bit more here to give guidance for those work group meetings. Yeah, okay. We're getting to the time where it's getting the work done and then bringing it back when we're ready. So, so it's a little early of the time, which is great. If folks get a little time back, is there any other topics that the council has? Let me make sure I'm following my agenda properly here. To bring to discussion today.
None for me, Craig. Thank you.
Okay, not hearing any public comment? Okay, hearing none. So we'll conclude today's council meeting and reconvene next Wednesday as necessary. If folks need more time or are not prepared, reach out and let me know. I'd like to try to just touch base each week. If it's not a full meeting, that's okay. But just to see where we're tracking on things to make sure that the pieces are still moving so that I can make sure the government offices knows the progress we're making. Got a little surprise this week when they were asking for some additional information on that. And so it's something we're going to just try to keep track on so we can keep everybody informed. So, which is good. All right, so I'll conclude our meeting. Thanks everyone for your participation today, and we'll talk to you later.
Thanks,
Hey,
Craig.
Craig.
Thanks.
Have a good one.